currently engaging the union in a bid to put an end to the impasse. We're still talking about issues surrounding the airlines now. Last month, the federal government revealed plans to commence the disbursement of the 5 billion naira bailout approved for the operators in the aviation sector. And of this sum, airline operators would get 4 billion naira, while other businesses in civil aviation will receive 1 billion naira. But a lot of questions are being asked about how far the funds will go in aiding the operations of the airlines, whether it is to pay salaries, to service airport charges incurred during the COVID lockdown, or even to stabilize operations post-COVID-19. I have with me an aviation consultant at Aglo Aviation Support Service Limited, Tayo Ojuri, who's right here with us to discuss this issue. Good morning, Mr. Ojuri. Thank you for coming on the program. All right. I mean, it's evident. You can see the situation with Arik Air. But before we go further into that now, what is the status of the funds right now? Any idea when they were likely to be disbursed?
Before we actually get to the funds, it's good to actually put a foundation on what's happened, which everybody is aware of the negative, significant impact of COVID-19 on the aviation sector. We tend to say we've been the worst hit prior because we're the first to get hit. You had all the airlines and the airports shut down in April, even before all the sectors of the economy got the impact. Prior to COVID, aviation contributed 1.7 billion to Nigeria's economy and actually provided 241,000 jobs. But between January to November this year, we've seen minus 53.3% decline in the number of flights and capacity. And we've actually now seen about 970 city pairs decline, from 970 city pairs to 100 city pairs. So we've actually now seen lots of airlines globally, in Africa, as well as particularly in Nigeria, experience tremendous fiscal constraints as a result of COVID. Let's put in place as well that prior to COVID as well, Nigerian airlines actually had underlying financial issues. We had two major airlines under receivership, which is Arik is one of them. And now, after COVID, the government said they were going to provide the solution of 4 billion to the airlines and 1 billion to the service providers. That has not been disbursed yet. Should it have been disbursed? Yes, it should have. Because immediately COVID struck and we saw all this impact on the airline sector. We've seen lots of airlines and lots of governments across the world. They appreciate the impact of aviation being an enabler and an economic catalyst. And in lieu of that, what they've done actually given money. There was the CARES Act in USA, where $250 billion was actually allocated. United got 10.5 billion. Lufthansa got 9.6 billion euros. We have Air France and KLM as well. They were all given palliatives, as I would say, or support from the government. All in all, we've actually seen, till date, about $173 billion from government to airlines. In Africa, particularly in Nigeria, we've not had that. In Africa, we've actually seen Air Côte d'Ivoire, the government of Côte d'Ivoire, give 20 million to Air Côte d'Ivoire to sustain them during this time, $20 million. We've seen Rwanda, because the Rwandan government, because of the strategic importance of aviation to the economy and to tourism, they've actually been able to give 147 billion Rwandan currency to the airline. For us, we've actually allocated this 5 billion naira, but it's yet to be implemented. Most of the airlines, as we speak today, are in intensive care, sorry to say. We actually need to give them first aid for them to jig them out of that situation and then bring them to the recovery section. But even then, this 5 billion is yet to be disbursed. The implementation process is yet to be deciphered. Are we going to, at one point they were actually saying it's going to be airlines that are members of the airline operators of Nigeria. Now, who are those that are operating? And even what would it apply to? 4 billion is not a lot of money within the aviation sector. So what would this focus on? What it's been focused on, or what needs to be focused on in this point, is actually staff welfare human capital resource and up the payment for that, because that's what that money would actually be able to address in the short term. Now, in the short term, it's been able to see that 4 billion. What are the number of staff on the payroll as at March when when COVID struck? What's a payroll? This has not been all highlighted for everybody to see. And the longer it's taking for this to be implemented, unfortunately, it's not going to augur well for the aviation sector in Nigeria.
So with all of what you have said now, of course, plus several arguments that even this amount, this 5 billion or this 4 billion that is set aside is not even enough to rescue the airline. So if we were to put a particular figure, how much do you think is actually required? How much will go a long way in reviving or aiding these airlines or preventing a total collapse?
To aid a total collapse, we've actually, IATA has actually said there's no perfect amount, and nobody has that checkbook. No government has to actually address the healthcare, infrastructure needs, security needs. No government in the world actually has that. So to answer your question, what needs to be done is not just one total amount, but what needs to be done is opportunities for the airlines as they grow and as they deem fit. Why do we need to? Nigerian government in particular has actually had a partnership with central bank to give single-digit interest loans to the airlines for 500 billion naira. So airlines are able to draw from this for their operations and to meet their maintenance and other forex needs. That is one portion. There's the opportunity with African Development Bank to be able to partner with African Development Bank. That way it opens an array of foreign investment equity into the airline sector. And that's able to actually sustain them, because with high interest rate, that's actually a negative impact on the operations of Nigerian airlines, especially when 80% of the operational costs and maintenance and even training is in foreign exchange. And foreign exchange is very difficult to come by now.
Absolutely. That's another issue entirely. Now, but, I mean, the airlines began operations after the lockdown about 3 months ago now. So how has it been like in terms of recovery, and then what's the cost been like?
June 8th precisely was a start-off date, and yes, we actually embraced the start-off process, and it was good. But don't forget that aviation is driven by the economy. As we speak about the COVID's impact on aviation, COVID has significantly impacted the economy as well. Prior to this time, we had talked about the impact of oil and the price of oil. During COVID, the price dropped. That affected our earnings. And since the government is the biggest spender, they're not able, people who are not flying, lots of meetings, there was no need for people to travel to Abuja. We have a triangle, which is Lagos-Abuja. So that domestic traffic was actually down. Like you said, it was 53.3% down from during this time. Yes, capacity has been actually down, 32% capacity load factor. So when you're actually flying with a positive load factor should be like about 80%. When you fly 70 to 80%, when you're flying with 32%, that would impact on your earnings. That's why the domestic airlines are unable to meet their commitments and even pay staff. So that's why you find out that they've reduced the supply arm, whereby number of airplanes flying are limited. It has a negative impact, whereby we've seen the cost of airline tickets now increase, which is not going to augur well again for people to fly. There's need for people to fly now that there's I'll call a restriction, removal of the restriction on travel.
And then don't forget the purchasing power as well, because when the price of the tickets are quite up, how much passengers would you possibly get?
Absolutely, that's a negative impact we're going to get. We're going to see this. This is actually going to leapfrog into 2021 first quarter, because aviation is a lagging or indicator of the economy. So what we're going to see is that people are not going to fly, even though it's the holiday season. People are not going to fly. People are used to doing meetings with technology now. The economy is not on 6 cylinders, so people don't have that disposable income to fly.
So how have the airlines been able to finance the operations, aircraft maintenance, training of personnel, even the payments of jet aviation fuel? How have the airlines been able to manage through these very difficult times?
I wish I could speak for them, but what we've seen from surveys is the fact that they've reduced capacity. Hypothetically, you have about 20 aircrafts, you've reduced that to 5 aircrafts. So your cost of operations reduces tremendously, and that way you're actually cutting staff a lot. You had some, prior to ARIC cutting staff, you had Airpeace let go some staff, but they were called back. But you find out that, to answer your question precisely, they cut down the number of operational equipment and the number of overhead that they're grappling with. They're still grappling and challenged with the sourcing of foreign exchange. Sourcing of foreign exchange is through central bank, and even though they have a preferential rate, they're not able to get that rate to meet these demands, which is affecting operations.
Now, let's talk about this aid again that we're talking about at the beginning now. Of course, the government is saying that these funds will be disbursed transparently. Do you actually think that can be achieved without any dissenting voices from operators?
There are already dissenting voices from the operators. You already have the issue of which airline gets it. We had about 3 weeks ago where they said airlines supported by governments, which is the two in receivership, or Ibom Air that is owned by and operated by Akwa Ibom State, is not eligible for those palliatives. So already there are dissenting voices on who should get what. And if they can actually put their ducks in a row and ensure that they actually put a united front, commit a united front to the government, and actually a transparent united front as well, have a payroll platform that actually shows who was on that payroll and how it was dispersed prior to COVID. So it's verifiable. It's transparent and prior to COVID, so that they can show that to government, and government is able to disburse this before things get out of hand.
Just like you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, of course, even before COVID, a lot of airlines were actually struggling to survive. Yes. Now, of course, it's quite a known fact that AMCON is still recouping, its bad debts with some of the airlines, and past intervention funds didn't go so well. So what are the chances that this bailout wouldn't be any different? What
we'll see after, if the bailout, like I said, they're in intensive care, once you take them out of intensive care and they're stabilized, the next step is, as we've seen, COVID is going to has provided the opportunity for the airline sector and aviation sector for a reset. So it's not all gloomy. It's an opportunity moving forward after COVID, or the opportunities for COVID for these airlines either to merge and then provide opportunity for equity buyouts, or you find out that they reposition or re-strategize their model, where their model is focusing on either domestic, secondary airports, regional airports, or cargo, and cargo. So all these scenarios will play out and would help the airlines strategize. So it's one thing for the disbursement to be done, is one other thing for them to actually get the disbursement, but that's not going to help them in the next 6 to 12 months. They need to stabilize and actually be operational and be firm with that. So this is where the opportunities provide themselves, and this is what we envisage moving forward.
So when are we likely to see a recovery process for the aviation industry, especially in Nigeria? When are we likely to see a recovery?
Looking at the crystal ball, we're looking at partial recovery 2021 last quarter, But that will, why we say that is, I just don't like throwing numbers out, is what we see is there's a forecast that the economy is going to come out of recession at the second quarter of 2021. Aviation is is driven by disposable income. Government is the biggest spender. So when there are lots of conferences, lots of travels, lots of meetings across Nigeria, domestic aviation would move faster first, and we've actually seen that in comparative analysis with China, with India, with Europe. Domestic traffic would start first and would actually move fast, then regional traffic, and that's how we see it evolving. So that's why we said 2021 last quarter.
Now, let's return to the issue of Arik now. Of course, Arik has declared 3 staff redundant. This has just come in.
3 or 300?
300.
Yeah.
300 staff redundant.
Yes, that's correct.
So, what's your reaction to it?
Well, we saw that coming anyway. With 300 going, because in the last 6 months, they had furloughed about 1,600 staff, and out of that, they had been on basic salary for the last 6 months. So without revenue coming in, and with most of the aircrafts out for heavy maintenance, there's no way they could have, commercially speaking, there's no way they could have been able to survive it.
So what's the possible way out of all of these challenges with the airlines?
It was natural evolution, which is sorry to say, but it's reality. Some airlines, and we've seen, I'm not a prophet of doom, we've seen airlines due to COVID and prior to COVID gone bankrupt. Even the best of them, Virgin Atlantic actually placed category Chapter 15 bankruptcy in New York Stock Exchange and the New York Security Exchange Commission. We are going to see some airlines go bankrupt in Nigeria. It's the reality. And we're going to see new ones evolve and new models evolve. But the reality is, come second quarter of 2021, we're going to see some airlines actually go bankrupt.
Wow. All right. That would be a point where we'll leave this conversation. Aviation consultant at Eagle Aviation Support Service Limited, Mr. Tayo Ujuri, thank you for being with us this morning.
It's always a pleasure. Please ensure you fly.
Absolutely. We can't do without flying anyway.